Good.
Just going to record that for those who didn't get in. Nick, we're gonna kick it off now. Thanks for joining us. I know that you're in the winery and it's busy times, but I'm really jazzed to have the chance to work through these with you. Maybe you can just give us a little bit. I emailed you a little earlier this arvo with the breakdown of what we're tasting. Maybe if you just want to talk about the two Chardis first, and then we'll go on to the Pinots after that.
Yep. Is it 21, 22, that order, or is it
22 GC and 21 estates, but in whatever order you like, guys. We're 1 and 2. GC's 1 and then 2.
We'll start with the one that you have first. So GC 22, did you say?
Yeah.
I have said that to Greg. Hello, Greg.
How you doing?
Good.
Guys, so as you know, Greg is our agent for Nick. He operates out of Adelaide and supplies us with all the good stuff.
Yeah. The confusion for me is because we haven't released that wine domestically yet. Greg does have that wine for his markets. So I was like, hang on.
So this is a global first. I love it.
Yeah. So the GC is basically being the accumulation of information from 40 plus years that Gary and I have been planting, growing, making wine from the Mirrabul Valley. So everything that we'd learnt from Dad's previous life at Bannockburn, whether that be vine spacing, vine density, what clones, what rootstocks, aspects, trellising heights, all of that was taken into account before this vineyard was planted. And there's this sort of random hill that was on the property that I didn't think would be the next one that Dad would want to plant. And all of a sudden he said one day, go and get the ripper and tear it up. And I'm like, oh, what's this about? Not really, just thinking, all right, he's got something wicked in mind. I'll play along. Anyway, he clearly understood that this is where the heaviest piece of limestone was on the whole property. And this is how crooked he is. He'd already planted vines on this place for 10 years prior to this before he said, no, I was waiting for you. And I'm like, what does that mean? He said, well, I've had my go. This is what I want you to do. This is what we've learned together. This is where we're at. So to then, like, I literally put the ripper through it and I'm like, it's just white gold. For a winemaker, when you see this amount of limestone this close to the surface, you're like, holy crap, this is going to be a pretty special site, particularly because it wraps around this sort of amphitheater area where it's north, northeast, and east facing. So there's different levels of limestone across this hillside, but it's the aspects and the amount of clay that dictates it more than the limestone. The limestone gives us this beautiful mineral component, and because it's limestone and volcanic soils, you get that minerality and length and vitality in the wine. The by Farr Chardonnay site is just truly a north-facing site. So we seem to think that it has a little bit more exposure, more sweeter lemon curd, but this other site, the GC, is a bit more sort of lime and citrus and has a bit more tension, I suppose, about it. There's a bit more viscosity. There's a bit more phenolics. There's just a bit more of everything. It's layered. Where by far there's very obvious components of the grape variety, obvious that it comes from certain vintages, it has great length, it has the complexities that we want to drink on a daily basis. But I think the GC takes it up a notch.
I think that over the years of drinking the GC, the two adjectives that always come to mind are lacy and crunchy. I don't know why, but those are the two words that seem to drop into my head every time I see the label.
I love that. The GC seems to, it looks like it's going to be this big, powerful wine. And then the laciness and the crunch and the fineness and the detail that really, rather than getting broader and flabbier, it actually gets tighter and finer and more concentrated in a way that very few Australian Chardonnays actually do.
Yep.
So it's definitely a site that it took us 7 vintages of making it before we released it. So all that was going to just mates that have restaurants and they were using it as house wine. So we were doing different times of different amounts of foot stomping. So the amount of time we'd have oxidative on skins, trying to extract more flavor, the different cooperages, the different bottling times, doing batonnage, doing no batonnage. And these were all the little things that we were tweaking, and we'd bottle off 2 or 3 different representations of that vintage in different styles to finally tune this to where we thought it best suited the site, and we could consistently make that style of wine from that site. And that's probably the most important thing of all. It's not only I want to make the greatest wine I can from that site, but I want to make it consistently. I don't want it to be a style that was just a one-off. I'm not going to be able to replicate that, because I think that's where the name by Farr is synonymous with consistency. Like whether that be Sangreal, Farrside, regardless of vintage, people can say, look, I like by Farr Farrside because it is this. And I want to have that in the glass every year.
I know you probably get this question a million times, Nick, but what do you think about cellaring? This is obviously super, super soon to be tasting it.
I think we talked about this last year where
yeah.
I think our Chardonnays, I think my same response last year, our Chardonnays age better than our Pinots. I think the grape variety as a whole can adapt to the Australian conditions and UV better than what Pinot can. So
yeah,
we need ideally conditions with Pinot for it to age well.
I was in Margaret River last week, and that's exactly what somebody else said about Margaret River in the context of Cabernet and Chardonnay out of that region. They reckon that Margaret River Chardonnay is way better at the changing parameters of what we're living with climate-wise than Cabernet ever will be.
I think it's retaining acidity. And in the past for Australia, it's been so difficult to do that. Yeah. Yet now we've just had 20, 21, 22, and even 23, where we've had acidities that we've never experienced before, not even 207 or 2011, which are other cool wet vintages. So it's really fun to have my mates in Burgundy ring me and now say, hey, I've got this hot fruit. It's dehydrating. I've got no acid. What am I supposed to do with it? So complete role reversal.
No, it's brilliant. Let's get on to the by Farr 21. One of the few that are rated. In fact, I think it might be the only rated one. I was talking about you guys last night at dinner, and they said, "Oh, but you've offered these wines without ratings." And I said, "Well, I know it sounds a little pretentious, but it doesn't need ratings. The people, what little we get is going to sell anyway, and people know and trust what you're doing there. So it's one of the rare opportunities where I don't have to rely on ratings for our internet business. So maybe you can just walk us through that 21 and tell us how you reckon it's going to be different from 22 when we eventually see it.
A little bit. The ratings is simply our quirkiness again. 5 years ago, we decided, can we sell our wines without having ratings?
Right.
And Irrewarra, the brand Irrewarra, was built on the fact that we did not want the name Farr on there because I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't living under my father's shadow.
Right.
So again, ratings will come, but I'm letting everyone that wants to buy these wines on the merit of what we've done in the past to buy them before everyone else jumps on them and picks out the highest rated wines. But 21 is for Chardonnay, will be one of the standout years. It will be the one that ages for the next 10 super gracefully. I'd love to have more of it in Magnum and see how it looked in 15 to 20. But the way that it has evolved or not evolved, it basically looks the way it did on the day of release, which was this time 12 months ago. So
I just wanted to ask you about the composite cork in Irrewarra. We're tasting the Pinot today, and it appeared to be in a composite, whereas everything else is not. Was that a conscious decision, or was that just...
all the whites, all by Farr whites are under the Diam closures?
Right. Okay.
I think that GC that went overseas would have been what's called a Diam 30, so they recommend it for 30 years.
Okay.
But I'm still toying with the idea whether it means more glue.
Yeah.
So just because there's more glue and it's going to age better before it breaks down, is this a better thing? Perhaps not. But cork-tone isn't the issue anymore. It's random oxidation. So to have 0.001 milligram of oxygen dictating where my Chardonnays are and how they're going to evolve and how rich they'll look, I'm not willing to take that risk anymore. Yeah. So we're doing more and more trials with the reds. particularly Farrside is now bottled half natural cork, half Diam. And the results are good. We're talking to Michael Dillon a lot. We're talking to Mount Mary a lot. These guys that have been using it for far longer than what we have. And they're very happy with 10 and 15-year-old Pinots.
All right.
Under these closures.
On the matter of Farrside, let's get into it. Number 3, guys, the 21 Farrside Pinot. We're going fast, but we'll go back and drink the rest.
So 21 as a vintage versus 22. 21, one of the coolest, longest, wettest vintages we've ever had. So the acidity, where we normally get sort of 6.5 to 7.5 grams of acid, and it seems to balance out really well with our level of concentration. We were at 9s to 10s grams of acidity. So we had to actually leave this fruit on the vine longer than we normally would. So people are like, how did you get that alcohol? Well, it's concentration. We were trying to get to de-acidify in the vineyard rather than have to do something in the winery that we really didn't want to do, which de-acidifying juice is a horrible thing, and it's adding chemicals. So I think we've found that we're looking for that balance, that alcohol, concentration, and acidity. And it's exciting to do because it's everything that we've ever done in Burgundy, but we've never really got to experience it more than a handful of times in Australia. So to have that level of acid, the approach to the fermentations was really different too. So we were perhaps tending to be a little bit more hands-off and only punching down 1 or 2 because we didn't want to extract too much tannin or too much richness out of the skins. We could really push these and again use the whole bunch fermentation, the stems themselves, to absorb some of that natural acidity and balance it out. So we were, rather than tasting only in the morning, we were tasting ferments 2 or 3 times a day, trying to find out where we were going to go with these wines. But we want that silkiness to come through, and then a level of crunch that we don't normally see in Pinot.
So looking at 3 and 4, the Farrside versus the Irrewarra, maybe it's quite interesting because the phenolics are so dramatically different between the two. For me, I'm getting like a super fine talc kind of phenolic out of the Irrewarra, maybe dusty perhaps, but there's this beautiful silky rich ripeness about the Farrside, which is so extraordinary.
It's the black soils of Farrside always show through, and there's that underlayer of concentration and power. So with age, the first 10 vintages that we released the Farrside, there was a lot more robustness, a lot more black fruits, full bore style of Murrubu Valley Pinot. And now with maturity of vine, we've found that they're far more ethereal, far more elegant. There's still the characteristics of that site, but they're a finer, silkier, more sophisticated version of what they were.
I think what's
Irrewarra is an hour or 55 minutes southwest in almost double the rainfall that we have here.
Right.
So it's where people think by far or far use stems. That's in the trade. Irrewarra is 100% destemmed. It just doesn't handle it. There's such a savoriness about that fruit because it's in such a cool region. The phenolics and the development of color pigments and tannins just doesn't get the same sort of exposure to sunlight because the canopies are so full, and therefore it's got a savory element, but there's also quite a sweet element to the back end of that palate.
I hate to say pretty, but there is like a gentility to the Irrewarra, which is really great. And it's interesting comparing them to Farrside because there's this growling, deep richness that's in the second and third level of your palate, and you know that it's there, but it's just not unleashed yet or as a fundamental of the vintage. It's amazing. Irrewarra
is fun to make because it's not by far. It's far more sort of phenolics and perfume of sort of Mornington, but in the right years, it has that sort of gravelly, moldy sort of Gippslandy character that you can get. So we like making it because it's different. We wouldn't do it otherwise. We don't own the vineyard. We've got a 10-year lease on. We've now had a 15 years, so we've got another 5 years on this next lease. So we treat it if it's one of our vineyards, but it's almost a testing ground to see what we can get away with down there, knowing that the higher rainfall means that someone's always got our back.
I've got to hold my hand up and say I was completely wrong because I remember giving Greg a hell of a hard time where's the by far when he first showed me the label about 6 years ago? I can't sell this if it doesn't say by far. And the interesting thing now is it's one of the fastest sellers of your entire stable. I'm constantly thinking, yeah.
Irrewarra Chardonnay is absolutely the fastest thing. That and Viognier, first things out the door now.
Yeah.
We couldn't sell Viognier, I don't know, 10 years ago. And now it's phenomenal.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so on to the Cote and the Tout. So guys, it's saying sold out already here, but these are the two people I've got to arm wrestle to give us more allocation if we're going to get any more allocation. And everyone who's here today will be the first to be shown it if we do get any more. These sold, I think, Nick, within 48 hours of releasing them. We have a massive following for these. So maybe if you can compare the terroir between the Tout and of course the trellising, the terroir between the two labels.
So Tout is the mixture of the three different soil types. So black soil over limestone, which is about 1.2 acres. There's red ironstone with quartz gravel, which is about another 1.1 acre. And then there's the grey sandy loam with buckshot, which is about a bit under half an acre. So they develop quite differently, but we pick it as a whole because it all goes into one tank. And what we find is the black soil versus the red versus the grey is about half a Beaumet to 3/4 of a Beaumet difference on picking day. And therefore we get different levels of acidity, different levels of flavour, of tannin. And I think that shows in the wine, the layering of flavour and development, the way it sits on your palate and it continues to build. And there's this extra length. Every time you think it's done, it just shows a little bit more. And particularly with once that wine sits in your glass for an hour and a half, it does that. It just opens, and the opening comes from the whole bunch of fermentation. That carbonic fermentation just means that everything's just a little bit tighter and just not so as expressive when it's first released, which one of Dad's key things for me when I was young was any wine that shows itself and you think looks amazing in tank when you're putting it to barrel, that's not the wine we want. That's already showing its true colours. He wants the wine that we have no idea where it's going.
Right.
And that they seem to be the wines that we want to drink in 5 to 8 years.
Yeah. There's something really powerful, that granite reference again I'm getting in the Tout versus the Cote. So for me, there's a certain roundness in the palate of the GC, whereas there's this incredible architecture and structure and linearity about the Tout. It's really exciting to see what I did today. And I think, I never get it right. Like when you open, the ambient temperature in Singapore is a nightmare. So today I poured the reds all at 12 o'clock. And I think for the one time I've got it right. We've got it at Arctic temperature here. So we've managed to get the right balance. The wines are actually showing really nicely.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
The Cote vineyard, the RP Pinot. So that is perhaps the most similar to Sangreal. So if we have, it's like the big brother to Sangreal. It has the more layers, it has more concentration, more sophistication, where Tout sits on the hill just above Farrside. So if you see any elements of Farrside in Tout, very understandable. That black soil continues up. But the RP, the Cote vineyard, is, again, I like the word architecture. That is, we are constantly working on the building blocks of that and where we can take this wine. We've been experimenting for years, but it's the one that keeps showing us a little bit more with vine age. Every sort of 3 or 4 years, we're just able to push it. We're able to try a slightly different Cooper, slightly different toast. How can we elevate this wine even more?
It's quite interesting because one of the few upsides of COVID was the chance to talk to you quite regularly. So I think this might be our 3rd or 4th year that we sat down and spoken. And I said the same thing to Vanya Cullen just the other day, doing a similar kind of experience. Was it's extraordinary how your vines are aging and showing amazing reward in this, say, the last 5 years. There seems to be a development that is quite exciting to watch.
I think we're in that sweet spot of now 85% of the vineyard be over 20 years old.
Right.
So get them to 15. 10, you know whether you've got a decent site. 15, you start to see what they're made of. By the time you get to 20, you're like, right, we've got 20 years before these things may fall over.
I think Mike Dillon said the same thing at Bindi. He said that's the sweet zone.
Yep. That, and we had such a run of warm vintages that even if you had great depth of root zone, it wasn't dictated by the sort of topsoil being fried. But during the drought, sort of 05 through to sort of 2010, they were very, very regular, very predictable, I suppose, because of the seasons that we were having. They were slightly different, and we were trying to emphasize those slight differences. But now that we've had some cooler years and we've got the vine age where they were younger vines back then, everything seems to be playing into our hands and where we want to be right now. Like we haven't had any rain for, I don't know, 8 weeks, but we're really not worried because the amount of moisture that we've got below sort of 20 centimeters is just phenomenal from having 4 years of just having constant rain. So everything's there. It's banked more or less in the ground.
Yeah.
The vines have all shot really evenly, which last year they were all sporadic, buds on, we were just all over the place. So we're quietly confident this is a year that might actually come together for us, and we're due because I think we did 150 tonne in 2017, did 160 tonne in 2018. We haven't done over 85 tonne since 2019. So yeah, we need some wine. Really.
Yeah, you got it due for sure.
Yeah.
So on to our last one. I'm interesting. I was writing a newsletter today about Marchand and Birch down in Great Southern because I'm kind of have this obsession about Burgundian-centric winemakers who make Shiraz. My working theory is that you guys bring a certain finesse or delicacy or something to the process that really seems to shine when you make a New World Shiraz. I'm really glad to have a look at this today. What's your feeling about this 21?
This was one that we left out there to hang. And I think if you look on the label, it might be 14%. We picked it mid-May and just concentrated as much as we possibly could. And it has a level of power and Shiraz-like characters that perhaps isn't so much that green olive that we normally get. It doesn't quite have that really dark cocoa-y sort of characteristics. There's a bit more expression of the berry and lots of berries. The Viognier certainly emphasizes it and lifts it and rounds the palate off the way we'd like it to.
What percentage Viognier have you got in there?
It's 4%.
Okay.
So very rarely it'd have to be a hot year for us to go under 4. 23's actually got 6% because it was so cool.
Right.
And we needed to add some stuffing to it. But yeah, 22, when that's about to be bottled, and I think it's perhaps one of the best Shirazes we've ever made.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It just the balance of flavor and tannin, where I think sometimes we lack the tannin in cool climate Shirazes. So a Pinot or Burgundian eccentric winemaker doesn't seem to get the same level of tannin because we don't want to work our ferments as hard as what a Shiraz producer does. We're not pumping it over continuously. We're not working that ferment. So if we don't have that tannin, we're not really going out there chasing it. So to the detriment of the wine sometimes.
There's a great interplay. There's a kind of exotic spiciness about it. And the thing that hits my top of my palate is a glycerine. There's this kind of sexy oiliness about the wine, which I'm really loving today, despite the fact that we're not eating. So this is a wine that I'm very happy to drink sort of straight up and not worry too much about what's on the plate next to it.
Bunch fermentation.
The question is it whole bunch?
I think it was just under 20%.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's
There's
basically not a by far ferment. The Pinot, there's nothing under 45.
Right.
And the Shiraz will always have a portion in the bottom of the ferment just to sort of try and get some carbonic characters initiated in the ferment.
Okay. Before we let you go, are there any questions from anyone for Nick? No questions. My big question is, when are you coming to have some dinner with us here in Sydney?
I've got to look now. Greg talks, doesn't he? Look at him now.
Well, you've got an open invitation, mate. If ever you're in transit, I'm sure we can pull something.
Well, this is the thing. Like, I got stuck in Hong Kong with Dad and I were in the lounge at Cafe for 16 hours in Hong Kong last
Oh
year.
Lord, you could have gone there and back and eaten with us in that time.
Wow. They shut it down. Like the plan was just to go in there, have some dumplings, see the guys at Lynx,
Yeah.
and come out again because we went over to do vintage. So Dad and I did our last, it will be our last, which is a shame, but Dad and I both did vintage at Dujac, which
Oh, brilliant.
we hadn't been there together since 1990 when I was a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
So to do it together with Jeremy and Jacques was
That's
huge.
awesome.
And the wines that came out were phenomenal.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And yeah, it was a special moment. But Singapore, from what I'm hearing, everyone's moved from Hong Kong.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone's spending their money in Singapore. So now I'm just going to have to change from Cathay to Singapore Airlines.
Definitely, mate. I'll make an introduction for you.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming, guys. I appreciate it and hope to see you soon.
No worries.
Thanks very much. Take it easy.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Take a Nick. Bye.
Bye-bye.